So up next, we got David Gianino with State of Virginia to give, I don't know, David, more of a regulatory perspective than operational. So whenever you're ready, take it away. Saul, I think you're still sharing. There we go.
How about that? Does that work?
Yep, looks good.
Awesome.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
David.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Giannino. I'm the state plant regulatory official for Virginia, and I work at the Virginia Department of Agriculture. And we were either the second or third state to get spotted lanternfly. So we've been in this since fairly early. Obviously not as early as Pennsylvania, but we've had many years working with this. And I'm going to be giving kind of a different kind of perspective on and update for our state and possibly a regulatory update for everybody to kind of grasp where we're at. So again, what I'm going to do is just focus on our particular quarantine and regulatory side of the house. So I'm not going to be talking about operations at all. So just again, real brief, Pennsylvania first confirmed spotted lanternfly in 2014. And then Virginia began surveying annually for egg masses and life stages. From 2014 through 2018, every year we would follow up with any sort of trace forward locations and nurseries. And unfortunately, in January of 2018, that's when VDAC's inspector staff found our first egg mass and population. It was in the city of Winchester at a landscaping store where they sold flagging stone and landscape stone. And that's how we believe it came in. Was egg masses on stones. So after that, we really ramped up our staff and started doing surveys. This was a joint effort between VDACs and USDA PPQ here in Virginia. And by the end of 2018, we had approximately 2 square miles of infestation. So through those early years, we worked with USDA to obtain treatment permissions. We did exactly like what Saul described. We marked trees, we set traps, we surveyed, and then we treated tree of heaven with the trap tree method. So we went through all of that in 2018, moved quick, solicited some funding resources out of rapid response through PPQ. So thank you, PPQ, for supporting that, all the work we've been able to do so far. And our goal, as Saul mentioned, was to treat every tree in the area, in the infestation zone. And then we also did a half-mile buffer out from our confirmed positives as well. So Saul mentioned sometimes you have contractual issues, you get permission issues. And for us, it was kind of timing issues. We really started early spring. But ultimately, we did perform a follow-up survey after all of that work. In the fall, winter 2018-19, and we found that the population had already spread and essentially doubled. And that's either a combination of it spread that year or it had already been there and we just missed it through our surveys. So after our work to try and eradicate it, we decided this population is here. It is going to be something that we're going to have to work with through a number of years. And so in response to finding that persistent and established population, we set up a quarantine in 2019 for the city of Winchester and Frederick County, because at this point, the population was in both locations. So our quarantine language was very similar to the Pennsylvania quarantine. It required permitting of staff and individuals who are moving products outside of the quarantined area. They had to receive training on spotted lanternfly life stages. They also had to inspect their regulated articles, and if they found spotted lanternfly, they were required to mitigate any spotted lanternfly that they might have found on those regulated articles. So very similar. We set up our own permitting system. At first, we relied on Pennsylvania's, and then we set up our own, give Virginia businesses an opportunity to do it here in the state, or obtain Pennsylvania's permit. And then we, in our quarantine, also honored any other states' permitting system and requirements. So once and I'm just going to kind of jump straight into where we are and where we have been with our quarantine expansions. So again, not going to talk too much about operations, but we established our quarantine in 2019, continue to do field work, survey, treatment, And after a couple of years, we determined that populations were persistent in both the surrounding counties of Clark and Warren. And that was in 2021. And then in 2022, we saw a massive jump to multiple localities, cities, and counties. This is likely due in part to this time frame is when a lot of people were outside, a lot of people were, exploring parks and traveling and seeing family. Some folks were more at home. Everyone knows what I'm referring to. And so, as Brianna mentioned, a lot of spotted lanternfly gets moved around by individuals who might be moving product or parking cars or vehicles, high risk transport areas. And so we just saw a massive influx and expansion of where spotted lanternfly was in Virginia. And so in 22, we had one of the largest quarantine expansions for this program at that time. Now we have been doing, work again through working on spotted lanternfly since that time. And we have reviewed our populations and our confirmed localities in 2024 at the very end of the year. And our commissioner has made the decision to deregulate the spotted lanternfly quarantine in Virginia. I'll talk a little bit more about that process, but just for visual effect, I've captured our maps, so that I'm going to go through just the visual side of what I've described here. So again, 2018, those circles with colors are existed egg masses with different varying levels of counts. Looks like 1 through 5, 5 through 12, and then more than 12. So it goes green, blue, and then red. So we felt we had a fairly good idea of where that population was. And so our goal was to treat every tree of heaven either with herbicide or systemic insecticide in this area, in those boxes. And then unfortunately, again, this is kind of the post 2018, beginning of 2019 populations. You can see that it escaped out of that zone, which is the yellow bordered area in Virginia there. And then in 2020, you could see some localized distribution, pretty slow spread. Red triangles are positives, the diamonds are negatives. And so it was spreading out locally from that point in 2020. Populations had crossed over here into Clark and not quite into Warren County yet, but it was getting close. And then in 2021, this was our map. We had a lot of different populations at the end of 2021, but you can see this is why we expanded right here in this top right-hand corner. This is why we expanded to Clark and Warren, because those populations had spread significantly there. And these other isolated populations we were going to deal with on a eradication basis. So in that's why we didn't expand in 21. We wanted to wait for 2022 to see. And so there it is, the 2022 populations in Virginia. Again, I took away the negatives, so it's just positives here. But those populations were unsuccessfully, they were not successfully eradicated, I should say. And so with those persistent populations being there, we decided to expand the quarantine in 22. This is our positives from 2023. So you can see those local infestations spreading out farther and a couple more isolated locations popping up, one of which of significance is there in Richmond. And then this is our 2024 survey data. And so given that the spread was so significant and every time we expand the quarantine, we seem to be behind the 8 ball and we don't capture all of the localities because we're waiting on survey data, we're waiting on treatment efficacy to see if it worked or not. We ended up being behind every time we expanded our quarantine. So what I'm going to move into now is kind of where we are with our quarantine and what our plans are. So pictured here in the bottom right is the total locations and counties, so cities and counties in Virginia that have a spotted lanternfly presence, or we're just waiting on an official confirmation. So for context again, even though we had a quarantine in place since 2019, Virginia experienced some significant spread regardless of the quarantine. And so our staff have been doing permit checks and quality control on those businesses that are moving out of those quarantined areas. But again, there are some pathways that are very difficult and challenging to manage. And so that spread has occurred regardless of the quarantine, uh, leading to 67 of 133 counties and cities in Virginia that now have a population. So that is more than half of it's just over the 50% mark for our localities. So despite numerous treatment responses, neither VDAX or USDA have been able to eradicate an isolated population. We're just managing the populations, but none of them have ever kind of been wiped off of the map per se. And again, another challenge that I kind of mentioned was after every time we expand, additional populations end up being discovered. So as I mentioned earlier, we only have 22 localities under quarantine currently. And so we were waiting on survey data and treatment efficacy to see. But since that time, you can see there's been another 45 localities, cities or counties that have gotten spotted lanternfly. So knowing this, our commissioner wanted us to just double check and see what our authorities were within the state. And our treating crop pest law authorizes our commissioner to either expand or reduce the quarantine with the Board of Agriculture's review. And then within the actual specific quarantine language, there was a statement that said that the quarantine may be repealed by the commissioner when he or she feels that they said that the need for the quarantine no longer exists. And so with these kind of background informations, the spread rate, the quarantine efficacy or not, and the national perspective of spotted lanternfly as well, the commissioner considered the following items when he was thinking about deregulating. What was the spread rate through Virginia and throughout Virginia of spotted lanternfly? What is the impact the impact of the quarantine having on the population of spotted lanternfly? What are treatment efficacies and how well is the treatment working to control or limit its spread? And also, what types of products are available for businesses and how hard is it to treat this pest on an individual basis? What are our survey limitations and challenges? As Brianna mentioned, there's not a known lure, and so a lot of the surveys and trapping tools rely on knowing where it is or finding it visually. As I mentioned, availability of treatment options. What do growers or producers have available? If there are inadequate quantities or chemistries out there for individuals to use. What is the national spread of spotted lanternfly? What are the vineyard treatment options and risks, specifically here in Virginia, is one of the items that he considered and spoke with vineyards and winery owners in Virginia as well. And what would be the cost of exporter compliance? How much would we have to absorb as a state agency if we were to get rid of our quarantine and permitting? And then also, what are the impacts of states or countries that say, well, if you don't have a quarantine, then we don't want products from you unless you can guarantee it. And then again, kind of historical lagging. The time that it took us to expand a quarantine always put us behind what the true population's locations were. And so were we actually being effective when we expanded our quarantines or not? So with all of those items considered, the commissioner decided to deregulate spotted lanternfly and repeal the quarantine. And so where we're at currently right now is we have submitted a regulatory repeal request through what's called the exempt process for us here in Virginia. What it means is it goes through one round of public review and provides an opportunity for individuals to comment through a 30-day public comment period. In that public comment period, if we were to receive 10 comments of concern from Virginia citizens or a couple of other high-level officials in our state legislature, then we would pause and go back through the standard process. Where we're at today, it closes today, the public comment period does. And since we've received no comments, it closes tonight at 11:59, so there still are opportunities for people to comment. But if no comments are received, then the quarantine will actually be repealed March 27th of 2025. That's when it will go into effect. So in a state that is deregulating this pest, what is that going to mean for the state of Virginia and individuals or businesses? It means that there's not going to be a permitting platform in Virginia. Virginia Tech's going to take down the training from their website because they won't be able to receive those costs or manage it if there's not a need. And we're not going to be issuing permits anymore as our quarantine's authority to issue those permits will be disappearing. However, we can still issue like a compliance agreement and perform a phytosanitary inspection. So we fully expect that we're going to have more compliance agreements that we're going to have to establish and possibly more phytosanitary inspections for one-off shipments. Something else that we're going to have to consider is our messaging and public expectations. So now that the quarantine is gone, what does that mean for citizens or businesses moving within the state? Do we care? As Saul mentioned, we had a lot of varying and changing communications throughout this program. And so trying to come up with a consistent message going forward is going to be a challenge, but it's one that we're going to have to do. It means that spread is going to be unrestricted within Virginia, as there's not going to be a quarantine to prohibit that restricted movement. But one of the things that we do plan to do is we still are going to survey because we want to understand where and how spotted lanternfly is spreading. And another thing to consider for us is we're going to be the first state to repeal the quarantine, so there's likely to come some challenges with that. And you know, I'm open to questions if there are other types of questions, but for the sake of time, I realize that if there's not time, Scott, we can move on. So I'm happy to monitor that Q&A.
No, I appreciate that, David. Yeah, it looks like you got two questions in the chat from Judy. So if you can jump in and get those answered, we
Yep.
appreciate it. We'll keep moving on. Thanks again for your perspective, and it is novel, so it'll probably go a long way as we consider these things moving forward. So
Yep.